Well, good day, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Infection Control Matters. And we're going to be talking to the authors of a study on air purification in residential aged care. And I'm delighted to say quite a few of the team are able to be with us today. I'll first say hello to the lead author of this paper, who is Bismi Thottiyil Sultanmuhammed Abdul Khadar. And she works at Avondale. Is that correct, Bismi?
No, actually, I'm a student of University of Newcastle. That's Australia.
Okay, that's the first fail. There'll probably be more. Also joined by Professor Jenny Sim from Avondale and also Wollongong. Is that correct, Jenny?
That'd be the second fail.
No, Matt.
Another fail. Okay, I'm just looking at the author affiliations.
I work at the Australian Catholic University, but I have an affiliation also with the University of Newcastle, yes, as an honorary.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, Phil Russo definitely works at Monash. Hello, Phil.
I still do work at Monash. Thanks, man. Good to see you.
Yeah, and thank you very much. And last but not least, Professor Brett Mitchell, who definitely works at Avondale.
Oh, you got that one right, man. Well done.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks, man.
Okay, yeah. So we're going to be looking at in-room air purification in reducing acute respiratory infections in residential aged care, which is a paper published recently in JAMA Open. We'll put the reference in the blurb so you can find the paper and have a good read of it, because all of the information is there. And there's a lot of information, I have to say. So, Bismi, can we kick off with you and tell us about the background to the study and how you went about it to start with?
Yes, thanks, Martin. Actually, we conducted a multi-center double-blind crossover randomized clinical RCT. It was for 6 months from April 7 to October 26, 2023. And there was a washout period applied between control and intervention phases. These study phases were selected to align the study period with the historical epidemiological peak of the season of influenza in Australia. As part of the study, actually, the participants in the intervention group, actually, they had an air purifier containing a HEPA filter placed in their room. And for the participants in the control group actually received an identical air purifier that did not contain a HEPA filter. At the same time, actually, the air purifiers which did not have a HEPA filter remained on and provided minimum air change per hour as well. The placement of air purifiers was consistent with the government guidelines at that time, actually.
Okay. I mean, how do you go about designing this statistically? Because this is a group where it's people towards the later years in life, present company included in that, with multiple comorbidities and possibly repeated respiratory infections. And, how do you power a study like that, do you think?
Basically, we assumed the expected proportion of participants with an ARI would be 40%, with a sample size of 94 participants in total. So the study actually was powered to 80% to identify 50% reduction of acute respiratory infection at a 5% significance level. And also, we included 40% attrition rate in this trial as well, and therefore the sample size of 132 participants was required for the trial.
I'm going to ask Brett a question. It's an RCT crossover. Why a crossover? What was the advantage of doing a crossover compared to other types of methods?
Yeah, it's a good question, Phil. We tossed up, and Bismi tossed up lots of different study designs. And so you could have a cluster randomized controlled trial, you could have a parallel randomized controlled trial with individual people randomized, or you could have this crossover. And the idea of a crossover was that that everyone ultimately acts as their own control. So because, as Bismi mentioned, everyone receives both intervention and control, you're able to analyze their data at an individual participant level. So that means when everyone's acting as their own control, things like vaccination status, the number of visitors someone have, the amount of mobility they might have, social interaction, you're actually comparing that essentially person to person within themselves. So long as that doesn't fundamentally change throughout the course of the trial, then a lot of those confounders are adjusted for automatically as part of that design. So it's a really good design. It also allows you to use less participants. But one of the big problems with that study design is that people may not always make it to the end of the study. And that was one of the challenges that we faced given the population of the participants.
Perhaps Bismi, did you the facility that the study was undertaken in, do you have any idea of what sort of ventilation they have normally? Does every room have its own supply and exhaust, or is there no ventilation, or do they open up the windows? What's the sort of situation in their normal environment?
Basically, the study conducted in facilities where they didn't have any previous sort of air purification or any just not they relied on natural ventilation basically. Obviously this is aged care facilities, nursing homes. So that means these are their homes. They have their own choices to open windows and close windows when they want to. We designed this study as pragmatic trial, but definitely, there was natural ventilation. Apart from that, there wasn't anything. So this was the first type of air purification that kind of, engineering ensure that we have used here.
Sure. Okay.
Jenny, can I ask you about organising this study? Because, it can be like knitting fog sometimes trying to get something into a care home. Did the organisation of it go well, and getting consent from people, etc.? Was that an issue? Because if you've got cognitive impairment, that may be a bit of a problem to try and get consent.
Yeah, so I'll answer the consent question first, Martin. We certainly went through a comprehensive process around consent. We used, established norms around trying to determine if people had cognitive capacity to consent. We used the MMSE as a cutoff point. And so for people that had an MMSE of a certain score, and Bismi might need to share what that exact score was because I can't remember. But those individuals, we would ask them for their consent and ask their next of kin or guardian for their consent. So we still wanted to try and ensure that the participants had the right to participate and consent to being in the study, but also followed through around their guardians. We made a deliberate decision not to include people who were under the Public Guardian Act because their consent needed to come from a government jurisdiction, and that was just a step too far for us to take from that perspective. But that was the only group that was excluded from the perspective of consent. Everybody else was invited to participate via an email and communication and Bismi talking to them, so multiple processes. The facility helped us to promote the study to the family members so that they were aware of it prior to conversations, and then we just went through that process. From a logistics perspective, the study was enormous. I can't remember how many trucks came with air purifiers on the back.
Seemed like a lot.
It seemed like a lot. We had to get 4 skip bins, or maybe it was 6. I can't remember now. We had to order extras on the day to get rid of the styrofoam packaging and the cardboard boxes and everything that was on the external components of the study. We were literally in the car park ordering skips to be removed and others to come. The process of unboxing happened. I don't know, it was all hands on deck. Brett, Bismi and myself and Julie McDonagh, I believe, we unpacked everything. It was like, I don't know, mayhem, if I'm honest, but at the same time, it was incredibly exciting. And then finding a place to store them. We were incredibly lucky so this study was done in 3 different facilities. We found empty rooms that didn't have allocated residents living within them at the time. So there were literally pods of groups of rooms that were vacant with nobody waiting to come in, but their rooms were actually vacant. And we stored them in there. And the photos of that are pretty funny, to be honest. There are just air purifiers everywhere you can see.
And it brings back memories too, Jenny, of...
Absolutely. I was thinking that actually.
Yeah. I mean, some of the other things, we had to label the air purifiers and so we take air purifiers, the HEPA filters out of air purifiers. And of course, Bismi couldn't be part of any of that process, and we had to number them and make sure we got our numbering correctly so we didn't stuff up our system for later on. So it was an interesting time.
It was a bit clandestine, wasn't it, Brett? No, Bismi, you can't be anywhere near here.
Yeah,
and off Brett
right.
and I would go, yeah? So it was pretty funny.
It's the practicalities of doing research, isn't it? That sort of that sort of
That's
stuff.
right. Yeah.
And I guess add to that, it was in the middle of COVID. We were in a facility that required, multiple, we had to be vaccinated. We were wearing masks. We had to do a whole heap of different things. Every time we went in and out, we had certain procedures we needed to follow. So it was, very interesting times. Yeah.
I mean, I'm guessing that because you consented everybody, you got good compliance because people have volunteered to have these machines in the room. Because I know the AARDS study in the UK, they found that the machines were being turned off a lot of the time. Did you find that to be an issue, or were you able to monitor just to see that the machines were on all the time, or was because consent was obtained meant that people were quite happy to have that in there anyway?
Yeah, that's quite good, actually. Good question. Basically, Martin, actually, we were really looking into that as well. We had some registered nurses actually that before the trial commenced itself, we had, and we gathered them actually. We gave them some introduction and what we were going to expect from them, so they knew what could happen in that space. So basically, this is Nathan Momas said actually, a lot of people with cognitive impairment that can happen actually. So we were expecting this kind of machine turning off and things like that, or some automatic failure, power failure, or any machine trouble and things like that.
Yeah, I think Bismi, by and large, that was when there was sort of a malfunction, a temporary malfunction with the machine, and we could replace it pretty quickly, usually within a few hours. And the other circumstance, I guess, is you were going around and checking those machines frequently as part of your data collection process, and you weren't finding them turned off very often, were you?
No, absolutely. Yeah. And that's also one thing that actually we have included in the data collection, form. If anything that unexpected, like any turning off, any machine turned off or anything like that, anything and everything was always included in that part actually. And we have included the time actually that, the time of exposure and things like that in the data collection. So that was pretty, clean and neat and, tidy data actually, yeah.
Okay, let's talk results. Oh, sorry, Greg. Sorry, Phil.
Sorry. Just one more question before we get on to the results. The fidelity of because these machines need filter changing or filter cleaning. Was there an audit done on the upkeep of the machines?
Maybe that's a good one for Jenny to answer.
Yeah, anybody can answer that.
Bismi couldn't do this because she wasn't allowed to
Yes,
know
she wasn't allowed to see.
Which air purifiers were intervention and which were control. So we all took it in turns periodically to go up and clandestinely, again, check the filters, make sure everything was working. We had a process whereby we had to clean the outside filter, and then we had to follow that process as per manufacturer's guidelines. So the filters themselves didn't need changing during the course of the study because they last greater than 6 months. So the filter itself didn't need to be changed, but the external, I don't know what the right word is, but the external section of the machine did need to be cleaned. And we just had a research assistant that helped us with that. And then either myself or Brett or Julie would go and do that activity around the 135 different air purifiers we had going. So it was, again, quite an activity periodically, about every 4 weeks or so. Yeah.
And Jenny, I guess it took what, about a day? Day and a half? Yeah.
A day and a half, yeah.
Really?
Every time we did that, because we had to manually clean them, wash them, dry them, put them back. Yeah.
I reckon if you had this implemented, though, we'd probably do it faster. Part of that time was because we had to make sure that Bismi remained blind to the intervention control. And we were really careful because we didn't want to mix things up with purifiers and things. So there was probably an extra degree of care that we needed to take that might have slowed that process down a little bit. But
I think individually for each resident, it was like maybe a 5-minute job if you didn't have to worry about all the things we had to worry from being part of a trial. So I don't think it's an overwhelming element of managing the air purifier. I don't think it makes it any less viable as an option. But if it was in someone's room and they manage that process with the staff member, I think it could be done quite seamlessly.
Yeah.
Just took us a long time because of the nature of the research study.
That's because you're a professor and a cleaner would do it in 10 seconds.
Thanks, Martin.
Okay, let's go on to results then. I'm itching. Who's going to talk about results?
Bismi will, of course.
Of course, the primary outcome of the study was the incidence of acute respiratory infections. The acute respiratory infection was defined as the sudden acute onset of at least one or four respiratory symptoms, including cough, sore throat, shortness of breath, or coryza. At the same time, actually, we also included a clinician judgment that the illness was due to an infection as well. The study included 135 participants, which included 78 females and 57 males. And come to the research part of the trial, actually, there were 42 ARIs identified in the control phase among 123 participants in the total control group. That was 34.2%. That compared to 31 ARIs among 125 participants in the total intervention group, which was 24.8%. Actually, there was no significant difference in the incidence of ARIs between the groups, which gives us an odds ratio of 0.57 with the confidence intervals of 0.32 to 1.04. And the p-value was actually 0.07. However, when we come to the participants who completed the trial, which was 104, and those participants who exposed to control and intervention phases, there was significant reduction in the number of acute respiratory infections. That means 62 ARIs were reported among 104 participants who completed the study. That was 29.8%. In that, there were 37 ARIs was identified in participants who were in the control group, and also those people who exposed to intervention period that the ARIs experienced was only 24%. That gave us a result of a significantly fewer ARIs among participants who exposed to intervention phase, with an odds ratio of 0.53 with the confidence intervals of 0.28 to 1, and the p-value was 0.048.
So there was a difference between intention to treat and those who completed the study. So, I mean, what are the difficulties of analysing intention to treat in this age group? Is that what brought the challenge there? And, do you think it was powered enough then? Because it was actually pretty close, wasn't it? It was P0.07.
It was. Not
so
sure.
it was almost there on the intention to treat analysis as well.
Yeah, that's right, actually. Yeah, definitely we had, although we expected, we had number of participants who dropped out of the study, which is something that, we can say that some, limitations of the study, definitely. And that's also reducing, that impact, the significance of the finding in the finding as well. We had 31 participants who dropped out throughout the trial, but 104 participants who completed. That's what we are interested in that, actually. But it's powered in that way, actually.
Yeah. I mean, Jenny, what's your opinion of the results? Because it was close on intention to treat, but, over the line on whole participation.
Yeah, I think it's challenging. Definitely on intention to treat, there is no statistical significance between the intervention and the control group. That is how that worked out. There's a clinically appropriate reduction, however, in the group that, used the air purifiers as the intervention. I think the other thing that's challenging about the results is, despite our very best planning, we had logistically planned the study so that the washout period in the middle would be at the peak period of influenza and therefore likely acute respiratory infections in the Australian winter. For some reason, in the year we collected data, that wasn't the case. The peak period happened about, 5 to 6 weeks earlier. So we had more infections in phase 1 than we had in phase 2. And as a consequence, I don't think we could have predicted that. It's just the pragmatic process. I think when you analyze and look at the data on all of those that managed to go all the way through the study, and remembering the people that dropped out are people that died. We are talking about, a significant aged population living in residential aged care facilities because they require that level of care. So we always knew that we would have a significant number of people not being able to complete the study. But when we analysed the data for those that did complete, there is quite a statistically significant difference between that. And I think that shows us promise. I think the other challenge for us is that this is a study about in-room air purification. It's not a study about whole of facility air purification.
I was going to ask about that because presumably some residents,
So all we could do is measure the air purification in their rooms. And then because we couldn't obviously run an RCT for people in one aged care facility and have air purification in the common areas, because that would confound the results significantly. So I guess it's a pragmatic study. It gives us some information. We know most residents are in their rooms about 12 hours a day as a minimum. Some are there 24 hours a day. Others are there about 12 hours a day, and there's a mix for that. We did collect data on that, indicative amounts. And I think based on that, we know that air purifiers can reduce the potential for acute respiratory infections when they're placed in someone's room. But I think more research needs to be done, Martin. Yeah.
That's always a good conclusion, isn't it?
Well,
Brett, can I ask you? We've mentioned the words statistical significance a number of times during this conversation. Do we really worry about that anymore these days? It's more about the clinical importance, isn't it? And what is your take on the results?
Yeah, good question. That's a hot question, that first one, Phil. I mean, so, in clinical trials, we do have to use some arbitrary figures around alphas, and that's 0.505. And so therefore, that's the sort of magical P number that people hold themselves up to. And, 0.00, so it's 0.049 versus 0.051. And you got, one saying statistically significant, the other saying not. In reality, that's, maybe a quarter of an infection or higher one infection in other studies. So there are debates about the utility and usefulness of arbitrary thresholds like 0.05. I therefore think that, as Jenny alluded to, that it's important to look at the clinical meaning behind some of these. And I think what we saw is meaningful reductions. These are residents at the end of the day who are experiencing less, by and large, less acute respiratory tract infections. But does it reach that threshold? No. Therefore, we have to say it doesn't work in the context of that intention to treat.
I hate that expression, it doesn't work, though, because it pushes people to say it doesn't work. And I thought Jenny's, clinically impactful. I mean, at that level, if you said to anybody, would you buy that for your mum in a care home? Would you think that? Would you want that for your mother? You go all day long, wouldn't you?
So Martin, that's my thoughts. Like, if I had a loved one in an aged care facility, they'd have an air purifier in the corner.
To say it doesn't work is so fine. It's so concrete, isn't it? And I know what you're saying, Brett, and I know you are flexible on this in your thoughts, but to say it doesn't work.
That's right. That's a difficulty between. I say that not because I believe that. I'm saying that because that's what we have to use when we report clinical trials. So it would be disingenuous of me not to say that. But what I think Jenny's point is right. Would I want one? Yes. Would I want my mother to want one? Yes, I would. And I think.
Would you want your mother-in-law to have one?
Oh, man, it depends. Of course, she's lovely.
Yes, of course.
But she might be listening. So would I, I think the other thing that Jenny mentioned there about the completers, right? So these are the people who got the entire intervention and the entire control. And I think there it really tells the true story. And that we did reach the arbitrary threshold, 0.48 or something it was, so it was still borderline. But there we saw statistically, in inverted commas, significant reduction. And but I think the other really important thing Bismi, is some of the secondary outcomes that you looked at in your study, and it might be worth just mentioning those.
Basically, thanks for reminding that. Actually, thanks, but definitely that's something that we looked at that as well. About number of hospitalization, number of medical consultations, number of ED admissions due to any acute respiratory infection. Actually, these were our other outcomes related to this study. So we measured those ones actually, and we found reductions, which we still can tell us actually. There was severity of infection was reduced in those people who used air purifiers with the HEPA filters in their room actually. So
That's really important too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, actually we got like medical consultation was definitely like 33% reduction in medical consultations in intervention group, especially in the first phase actually. And considerably, again, the number of hospitalization and ED admissions also reduced all over the trial due to the effect of this intervention.
Right. What are the chances of doing a cost effectiveness analysis on this? Because this is a relatively cheap, non-medical intervention, non-pharmaceutical intervention, isn't it? That could have cost savings apart from the human aspects of this.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting because the beauty about economic evaluations is they include uncertainty, and so this goes to that point about the arbitrary thresholds that we talked about earlier. So I do like economic evaluations because it includes all that uncertainty and you model that multiple times. And I guess, there's costs of electricity to run, there's costs of cleaning, there's the upfront cost of the purifier, and there's the maintenance of that and the requirement to change that HEPA filter depending on how much it's used. But that can also run into hundreds of dollars potentially per year. So I wouldn't want to speculate on that, but I think it would be an interesting exercise to think about for the future.
It would be, because just preventing an admission to hospital, that must be incredibly costly compared with the overall cost of running these.
That's
I would have thought it would be, but cost effective. But,
It'd be interesting to look at that aspect of it. But what this study does show is the potential for a much larger study, and actually how big would that study have to be? Have you got any comments on the size that would really, what would really push you over the significance to say it works line, even though I'm convinced? But
the thing about these studies that's really important is that this study was powered appropriately, as Jenny alluded to, and Bismi alluded to. We had people drop out of the study, and I'll just say that the people who did die did not necessarily die from acute respiratory tract infections. We didn't record and look at that, so we shouldn't make that attribution or link. But in terms of bigger studies, we would be talking about a cluster randomized controlled trial as the type of study that needs to happen next. Now, I'm aware there's one underway, or should be one underway in the UK, and involving a large number of nursing homes there. And that was a cluster RCT. So that would be one way to do that. I think that might have upwards of 90 odd nursing homes in it. And, to power something sufficiently would require a significant number. The challenge with those types of designs, though, is that it's an all-in or all-out scenario, really, because you're having to put air purification in the entire cluster. That could be the nursing home. Therefore, not that you'd expect anyone to say they don't want to be part of that, but ultimately they could have the right to say, I don't want to be part of that. I don't want air purification in my facility. So there would require some ethical challenges, and vice versa on the other side to it as well. But that's the best way. That's the type of design that would overcome some of those sample size issues, but also overcome that issue of purification, where we only just looked at in-room air purification and didn't consider that sort of communal aspect as well. So one for the future. We were interested to see what happens. But what I was going to say, sorry, I lost my train of thought. The important thing about these types of studies is, even though this one was powered sufficiently, I would argue, they still make a meaningful contribution because they not only inform future research, but when people go to do systematic reviews and meta-analyses of these types of studies in the future, you can look at the directionality of some of these studies combined to inform guidelines. That's particularly important when you use things like grade recommendations. And these types of data sets can contribute to larger or to other data sets to make a large data set to inform decision making. So when they're designed well and they have a low risk of bias, which I hope this study does have, then they can help be used combined with other studies to inform guidelines.
Thanks, Brett. Well, congratulations. I'm looking forward to the bigger study when there's going to be thousands of trucks delivering big machines to all these aged care facilities. And I hate to think of the packaging that's going to go to waste, but I'll just put that little thought aside.
We were able to recycle most of that. We went to great lengths to do that. Yeah,
it's that foam packaging that really annoys me.
Polystyrene.
Cardboard. Yeah, the polystyrene. Anyhow, Bismi, congratulations. Fantastic work. Excellent study. Fascinating results. And a really well done study as well. Great methods, great design, and good questions, good outcomes. So congratulations and well done.
Thank you very much, Martin. Of course, thank you to my supervisors. Actually, without their support, we couldn't achieve this. Actually, they have done a lot. They have worked so well. They have tirelessly working really hard. Actually, that I couldn't expect anyone to do that. Actually, they did very, very, very well. Actually, in that, definitely.
Well, hopefully it increases your thirst for research and doesn't take away your desire for research in the future. So well done. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you very much for joining and for your work, and Brett as well for your work as well. Martin, I think we're wrapping up. Is that correct?
We are wrapping up.
Good to see you.
Yes, nice to see everybody, and we'll catch everybody again on the next episode.